Well, as you remember, for 2 years, I sat at the feet of Dr. Rozan Yoshida at the White Frame Zen Center of St. Louis each Monday evening. The first floor was sparsely furnished, white walls, blonde wooden floors, light streaming through the windows. A sunroom on the right, exotic musical instruments perched against the walls, oud, vina and sitar, zither, harmonium, and reed flutes, and various drums. We ascended the stairs, removed our shoes, entered a large room, and with pillows we brought, or a cushion that was provided, we sat on the floor, concentrated our breathing, readying ourselves for meditation. Zen is the Japanese word from the Chinese word chan. And that's from the Sanskrit word dhyana, meditation. Dr. Yoshida appeared, silently took his place. We rose, bowed, and sat back down again. And later we would receive a teaching from one of the sutras. But first, 20 minutes of meditation. The singing bowl, the rin gong, rang 3 times, once for each of the 3 jewels. And this is how we began before the meditation. And if you want to read silently along with me, you can or not. But this is how we began. With deeds of loving kindness, I purify my body. With open-handed generosity, I purify my intentions. With stillness, simplicity, and contentment, I purify my senses. With truthful communication, I purify my speech. With mindfulness clear and radiant, I purify my mind. I am of the nature to grow old. There's no way to escape growing old. I'm of the nature to have ill health. There is no way to escape having ill health. I'm of the nature to die. There is no way to escape death. All that is dear to me and everyone I love are of the nature to change. There is no way to escape separated from them. My actions are my only true belongings. I cannot escape the consequences of my actions. My actions are the ground on which I stand. I vow to offer joy to one person in the morning and to help relieve the suffering of one person in the afternoon. I vow to live simply and sanely, content with just a few possessions, and to keep my body healthy. I vow to let go of all worry and resentment in order to be light and free. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Homage to the blessed, noble, and perfectly enlightened one. Buddham saranam gacchami. I take refuge in the Buddha, the one who lights the way. Dhammam saranam gacchami. I take refuge in the Dharma, the way of light and compassion. Sangham saranam gacchami. I take refuge in the Sangha, the community awake in the light. Taking refuge in the Buddha within me, I seek the path of light and beauty in the world. I aspire to help all people recognize their own awakened nature and realize the mind of love. Taking refuge in the Dharma within me, I learned to open many doors on the path of transformation. I aspire to help all people embody compassion and walk together the path of liberation. Taking refuge in the Sangha within me, the light shining on my path to avoid stumbling blocks. I aspire to build up the entire community, to embrace all beings and support their transformation. So after we said this together, the ring gong bowl was struck 3 times again for the 3 jewels, and we sat in silent meditation for 20 30 minutes. At the end of today, I didn't want to take time during the talk, but at the end of today, if some of you want to hang on for 4.5 minutes, uh, I'll play this a group of devotees chanting the three jewels at Bodh Gaya with His Holiness the Dalai Lama from January of 2018, and we'll do that in a little bit. But what I want to do right now is to talk about, we really focused on the first of the three jewels, taking refuge in the Buddha, and who that was, who the historical Siddhartha was, and how it was that he became a Buddha. But right now, today, I want to focus on the Dharma, the central teachings, of Buddhism, and we'll do that by focusing on the three jewels. So the first one is Buddham Saranam Gacchami. I take refuge in the Buddha, the one who lights the way. Psychiatrist and Holocaust survivor Viktor Frankl founded a therapeutic model called logotherapy, based on the existentialist notion that the primary force in human beings is the will to find meaning. To take refuge, so each one of these three jewels is I take refuge in. To take refuge means to commit yourself completely, heart, mind, body, and spirit, to find our sense of purpose amidst all the forces around us and in us that threaten to dislocate and fragment our lives. The Dharma existed before the Buddha and the Sangha existed, the Buddha said. He said he simply discovered it. All three, Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, describe what is most true about us, about our inner life, about relationships among human beings and between human beings and the non-human world, and indeed about the structure of existence itself. So I take refuge in the Buddha refers in the first place to the historical Buddha as a model of someone who achieved the enlightened life, and to welcome him to walk alongside us holding a lamp pointing the way to inner freedom. But it also has an internal spiritual meaning, and you see I've written a quote here from the Lotus Sutra, one of my favorites. It's incarnating your own Buddha nature through cultivating metta-citta, a heart mind of goodwill and compassion. By cultivating this metta-citta, this heart mind of yours, you become a Buddha. You see the Buddha nature of all beings, their potential for awakening, and you commit yourself to their, indeed the planet's, liberation. You remember in Romans 8, right? St. Paul writes, the whole creation is longing with birth pangs. Well, that's what's happening here. To take refuge in the Buddha means to affirm your own Buddha nature and your aspiration to fulfill it. Dhammam saranam gacchami. I take refuge in the Dharma, the way of light and compassion. To take refuge in the Dharma is to dedicate yourself to the Buddha's teaching of generosity, compassion, and wisdom that bring freedom. But it's even more than that. It has an internal spiritual meaning. You don't just think it or believe it with your mind. You incarnate the Dharma. You become the Dharma. And this only comes from experiencing the truth directly, unmediated by words and language and concepts. We'll talk about this next week when we talk about Zen. And that, they say, only comes through meditation. The object of meditation is the various scriptures which have been passed down. These are just a few, of course. the Dhammapada, the sutras, the Tibetan Book of the Dead, and so on, you realize in your deepest being, in your consciousness, the reality that language can only express through a mirror dimly. And there are three interrelated Dharma teachings. Pratitya Samutpada, dependent origination. This is the understanding of Martin Luther King Jr., where he writes about an inescapable network of mutuality tied in a single garment of destiny. Buddhism does not ask the question of origins. It's agnostic, really, about a creator. It's silent about any religious understanding of the universe's origins beyond what science teaches. But it does acknowledge the present reality. It's very empirical. It's empirical that we're all interconnected, interrelated, every single being, every single sentient being, every single cell, every animal, plant, microscopic organism, celestial bodies. We are a cosmos, all as one. Pratitya Samutpada lies at the heart of Buddhist teaching. We've already talked about this last week. Anicca, impermanence, change is inherent in all phenomenal existence. There is no empirical evidence that anything animate or inanimate, organic or inorganic, we can label as permanent. Therefore, attachment, as we saw last week, right, with the Noble Truths, attachment to any impermanent idea, notion, person, or thing leads inevitably to suffering. Think about this. Everything is impermanent, even our ideas about God are impermanent, right? There is no God outside of our ideas about God, Buddhists say. And therefore, there is no immortal soul because that suggests permanence. So Buddhists are have this understanding of anicca at the heart of things. And of course, it's connected to Pratitya Samutpada, right? And then finally, in another interconnected teaching, you have anatta or anatman. And those of you who attended the class on Hinduism recognize the root word of anatman is atman, right? Which we identified as soul, but really Buddhists say no soul, no self, no ego, egolessness. Remember from our Hinduism class, when the boy Svetaketu approached his father, the sage Udalaku Aruni, and asked, Father, what is Sat? What is truth? What is God? And his father said, remember, Svetaketu, take a piece of fruit, cut a slice. What do you see? I see seeds, Father. And Svetaketu said, and Udalaku Aruni said, Svetaketu, that is God, Tatvamasi. And the boy didn't understand, so he continued, the seed of a thing holds the entire thing. The seed of a thing is a thing. The seed of a fig grows into a fig tree. The seed of a pomegranate grows into a pomegranate tree. The seed of an apple grows into an apple tree. The seed of God grows into God. And the seed of God is in you. And so, Svetagetu, Tatvamasi, you are that. Well, people in the West, Christians, Muslims, and Jews, we love that, right? We love that. Thou art that. But here's the point for the Buddha. Remember, he's reforming Hindu thought. He grows up a Hindu, but then breaks from it. He then further asks, the Buddha does, what happens, Svetaketu, in his mind, he's asking, what happens when you cut open the seed? You discover there's nothing there. Think about that. Everything comes from nothing. You remember the story from a couple weeks ago when the Buddha threw his bowl into the water? It flowed upstream to the source of the river and beyond. And we asked the question, what is it that's beyond the source, beyond the eye? And here's the Buddhist answer, because anicca, because nothing permanent, nothing eternal, nothing immortal. Therefore, an atman, no permanent self, no soul, no God. What is beyond the eye? It's an emptiness that is full. It's a nothingness that is everything. It's a nothingness that is everything that in the end sets you free. You can't know that by thinking your way into it. You know that through experiencing it. You become the Buddha. Buddham saranam gacchami. I take refuge in my own Buddha nature. Dhammam saranam gacchami. I take refuge in the Dharma. You become the Dharma. You incarnate the Dharma. And finally, Sangam Saranam Gacchami. I take refuge in the Sangha, the community awake in the light. To take refuge in the Sangha is to commit yourself to the welfare of and support for your local Buddhist community. But it's even more than that. It has an internal spiritual meaning. The Sangha is the community of enlightened beings, not only as a reality, but as a commitment to awakening all living beings to their interdependent mutuality. In the book of Hebrews, the writer of the Hebrews talks about it as the great cloud of witnesses. Thus, it's the realization of the Buddhaverse, right? Of metta-citta, compassion infinitely magnified, embodying the heart mind of love. The Sangha, then you create the Sangha within your own communities. It's an egalitarian community of justice in which everyone is committed both to their own and to each other's fulfillment of the abundant life. It's a political commitment as well as a spiritual one. Taking refuge in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha are all meant for one purpose: to cultivate metta in your life, slowly expanding your self from your little self, through a series of selves that grow bigger and bigger and bigger, finally to a no self, which is realizing your Buddha nature, Citta, the Buddhaverse, or what Buddhists call the luminous mind. So that nothing at all is outside the realm of your care, your love, your compassion, your desire for liberation. And so that, friends, is the central teachings. There are others, of course, but those are the central teachings of the Buddha's the Buddha's thought, and they center around these three jewels, right? I take refuge in the Buddha. I take refuge in the Dharma. I take refuge in the Sangha. Well, I wanted to talk a little less today, and like I say, if you want to stay on at the end, I'll play for you the chanting of for about 4.5 minutes, the chanting of the of the three jewels with His Holiness the Dalai Lama. Where would you like to jump in? Good morning to Jerry and Mary and Emmy and Pat and Terry and Janet and Patty and Christine. Good morning to all of you.
Michael, if one was to follow these principles, let's apply it to today. How would that change or confirm the way we're distributing vaccines?
What do you think?
I don't know. Probably a more egalitarian way, or we would probably stand at the back of the line, maybe. I don't know.
Well, here's my response, David. Thank you for that. And some of you jump in. I mean, I'm certainly no expert at this. I'm kind of I'm in preschool when it comes to learning. Sitting at the feet of the Buddha here. So you all help me out. Seems to me that we would start by talking about what do you mean with the word we. And I mean, we could talk about it, what it means after the fact, like today, or we could talk about what it might have meant in terms of building kind of a world community, what Martin Luther King called a world house, where we and the Chinese government and other societies and cultures around the world wouldn't be so adversarial, where there would have been cooperation all along the way. We could go back in more recent history, a year ago when Americans first started learning about the virus and its impact in our country, and what that would have meant back then about how we would have dealt with each other as a society, as an American society. So it depends on what you mean by we, David. And I guess if you're talking about today, you're right. I mean, what does an egalitarian community that takes seriously the welfare of every living creature, of every living being, of every sentient being, how do you structure a society like that, and especially the promotion of the public good and of the public well-being, of public health?
Well, what made me think about this is when you talked about everything being dependent on one another. And that would seem very appropriate for a virus that knows no borders, and that solving the problem in Indiana, solving it in this country, really doesn't do any good unless we solve it in the world.
Absolutely. That's absolutely true. And that's why the we that I mean, I was reading into what you were saying, David, a little bit, but you notice where I took it, right? The we wasn't just, I mean, I could kind of sense that you were talking about a bigger we than just we right now here, but a we that was really, as I say, what King called the world house, right? The world house. And really, if you think about it, what's the word? What's the word for word? What's the word for house in Greek? Oikos, where we get ecumenical, but where we also get economy. This is not just a political question; it's an economic question. How do we connect together, right? How do we live with each other? right? Political, from the word polis, the city. How do we live together in a community? Oikos, the world house. How do we relate together economically, right? Where no one falls behind, where everyone is built up. You're asking a big question, David, but I expect that of you because you always ask big questions. But you're right. I mean, it's this interrelatedness of all being. And by the way, even of animal life, and eventually as we grow this understanding of the planet itself. Yeah.
Thank you.
Dave, it
It's
makes
why,
me
it's,
want to
it's
ask,
why our public officials, right? I mean, I don't always want to pick on Matt. Matt, you don't have to respond, but it's why this is the kind of thing our public officials, though, and this is what we expect of our public officials and our political leaders, right? And our religious leaders, that they're thinking in ways that connect us together, as an interrelated community, not that separate us. So you're asking the precise question that we expect our leaders to be struggling with in very practical ways. Linda, go ahead. Sorry.
well, I wanted to ask kind of back at Dave this question. I only can look at all of this through my own lens of Christianity. And certainly, as you draw the parallels, Michael, I mean, I certainly see the parallels of our faith origination in both of these religions that as we're studying them. And I feel like they're so clear here. But it feels to me as if when Christianity moved into the direction of original sin, and all of a sudden I have to be worried about my own personal salvation, be damned to the rest of you, we fall off and away from these jewels. And is there a way to bring us back to this more original, pure thought where I am as concerned for thou as for thou? Where did we break from this, I guess, is my question.
Well, you asked the question, Linda. It's easy to blame. It's easy to, exactly right. It's easy to blame the early church, and those kind of folks. The fact of the matter is that you and I have these tendencies within ourselves, right? And so we break. So it's too easy to blame the church fathers, somehow they perverted the message of Jesus, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, we can go back and do that historically. But again, that separates us from them. The fact of the matter is that we behave in ways that fulfill the worst interpretations of the book of Genesis. On the one hand, there's an inherent tribalism that's built into the human species, the hominid species in evolution, in our evolutionary history, that was positive, that helped us to survive as a species. But the tribalism also has these very negative, right, aspects to it that separate us from each other. Tribalism is like everything else. It has its positive and negative aspects. Which one do you want to feed, right? So the point of Buddhism is that you can't blame it on some doctrine long ago or some other folks in our ancient history. We are the ones who are responsible in the end, right? We are the ones who have a choice today, now. If we will separate ourselves from, our inner circle, then, how do we keep growing our circles of care? It's our choice in every moment to keep expanding our circles of concern. That's taking refuge in the Buddha, means taking refuge in our own Buddha natures, which is constantly calling us to expand our circles of care. Yeah. You ask a really important question, Linda.
I am reminded of, your answer is excellent, Michael. If one is trying to assign blame, that Rita Nakashima Brock wrote the book Saving Paradise.
Absolutely. She was in Fort Wayne, right, at Plymouth.
Yes. And she answered that question the best, for me, the best way that I had ever had it answered, because I always thought, what happened along the way? And she says that up through getting close to the end of the first millennium, the general picture of Jesus was the good shepherd, that, it was a loving presence, a loving leader, a leader that led with love, and and encouraged nonviolence. And she says, but the powers that be in Europe, primarily in Europe, she said they were preparing for the Crusades. I'm really shortening this drastically. And they found use in converting it so that not so much that we live together peacefully, but like I said, I am just shortening this thick book incredibly. But that the important thing is that the idea of paradise is not something we create on earth. It's somewhere else, some other dimension. It's, heaven. And the purpose of our lives on earth are simply to prepare ourselves to go to heaven. And don't worry about what the rest, don't worry about what your leaders are doing if it doesn't seem like they're just being good shepherds. That we're just supposed to be concerned about getting ourselves to heaven. That's what Jesus expects of us. And that's it. That's a very, very brief, amateurish expression of saving paradise.
Thank you for that, Patty. I remember when Rita Nakashima Brock was at Plymouth, and she is was an amazing scholar. I've read Saving Paradise and used it at retreats. And here's the I'm so glad you brought that up, Patty, because here's the secret. Heaven is here. And as we expand this metachita, right, this heart mind of compassion and care, we expand it out from our own heart mind, slowly gathering up Patty inside my heart mind, and Emmy and Pat inside Michael's heart mind, and Jan Gibson and Nancy Kildusky and Mary Flick. We slowly start gathering up others and others and others within our heart mind, so that in the end, it's no longer Michael's heart mind, but simply heart mind. So that the whole creation is realized as one. And so, Patty, thank you so much for sharing that. That's beautiful.
Michael, it's Emmy. I have a question. You said when you go into the space of nothingness, you know everything. Is that God?
Well,
explain that to me a little bit more. Is that when you die and you know everything, you go to be with God?
Well, it depends if you want me to talk as a Christian or a Buddhist, Emmy.
Well, I'd like to hear both, really.
Here's the point. Let me talk to you as a, let me see if I can put one foot in each one, and maybe other people want to weigh in here. I mean, at the point of ecstasy, it's impolite to ask for names. That's my first answer.
Okay.
Meaning, does it matter what you call it? Does an expanded, when your grandchild, I know that you're very close to your grandkids, Emmy and Pat. Mm-hmm. When your grandkids embrace you and say something that just melts your heart, are you ready to write it down in your journal right then, or you just melt into them and you just experience that kind of warm glow?
Ecstasy.
Do you need to give it a name? Right? Do you need to give it a name? Do you have to do you have to say right then, oh yeah, that's how I experience God? At that moment, you just are enveloped in the warm glow of metachita. Call it love. Now later, as a Christian, if you want to call it God, God bless you. But but somebody else might call it something else. And you know what? God bless them too. In other words, as I always used to say to my students, at the point of ecstasy, it's impolite to ask for names. It doesn't matter what you call it. That's one step removed. And what Buddhism attempts to do is to try to get us to more and more and more live in the moment, not one step removed where we have to describe it with names. We'll talk about that next week with Zen. You know, it's not unimportant to give it names because we're prisoners of language. You know, we're prisoners of metaphors. We have to understand things. That's who we are, right? As human beings. We and so to search for meaning, we have to talk about it, find words, metaphors, stories, and all the rest. I'm not saying it's unimportant, but in the first blush, right? Every spiritual experience is like that. And what the Buddha is saying, what the Buddha is suggesting is, wouldn't it be a good thing if we lived more and more and more there? You know? Pat is a good example of this for me. Pat Hurley, you know him. Pat has practiced meditation his whole life. Well, much of his adult life. And Pat has always impressed me because he says, you know, I haven't meditated in a while, but even now, when I'm hurting or when I need to, or when something's troubling me, I can sit and meditate and get to that place where I'm completely contented. He's not writing essays at that point, right? He's not in his left brain trying to analyze things at that point. He's in a contented space where everything is one and he's at peace. And Pat, I don't mean to put words in your mouth, but that's what this is. And at that point, do you need to call it God, really? Do you need to? You know?
Well, that's what earlier this week I was talking to someone and used the phrase that I was born from nothingness and I will die into nothingness. And to me, what you described, that ecstasy that you experienced with a grandchild at those rare moments, is heaven. And if I die into that ecstasy, I will be happy. And I can't reach that level if I don't appreciate your needs, the justices of the world that are either being shared or deprived. And the end result is whatever the name that you want to use, heaven, whatever.
Thanks, Pat. When you get at a certain stage of our lives, right, that nothingness is fearful. But as you further develop, as the Buddha says, is further develop this Buddha nature within, that nothingness is nothing but peace. And that's what you're sharing with us, Pat. Thank you. Who else would like to jump in? Terry, are you raising your hand?
Yeah, the thought that I had, as you described it, was the connection to what Jesus called the kingdom of God. That connection was made clear to me when I read Elaine Pagel's work on the Gnostic writings. Those who know, those who have some inner knowledge. And the idea of the kingdom not being out there somewhere, but within, and even more than within, among. So the kingdom is among us. The kingdom is within us, it's among us. So instead of heaven being something out there by and by, what Jesus talked about was something that was here and now and present among us. And that language is inclusive and specific. So I saw that connection to the Buddha, the Buddhist idea of that inner awareness. That it's pervasive. We're part of something, and that something is part of us. And whether you call it God or kingdom or heaven, it's got a lot of names.
Thank you, Terry. I want to just, I don't want to stifle the conversation, but I want to return to Emmy's question. It's an interesting psychological study. There have been lots of these studies done, and I wish I would have thought about this ahead of time. But Emmy, your question reminded me. Studies about mystical experiences. It's interesting that, I mean, and this sound, it's going to sound really obvious, but it really is kind of an insight that our psychologist friends have taught us religious types, us in the field of religious studies. And that is that Christians who have mystical experiences describe them in Christian symbols. Hindus who have mystical experiences describe them in, guess what? Hindu symbols and metaphors. Buddhists who have mystical experiences, Muslims who have mystical experiences describe them in Islamic symbols and metaphors and stories. In other words, even our mystical experiences, up until the very height of it, the peak of it, we're all still prisoners of our own metaphors, stories, symbols from our traditions. So that's why, Emmy, of course it's God, but of course it's Buddha nature, but of course it's an empty circle. Of course, and next week we're going to learn that it's a piece of dung, and it's the snow on the ground, and it's air, and it's my pencil, and you know what I mean? In other words, it's expansive, and it embraces everything. Up until that very end, we're still giving it names until finally nirvana is that place beyond the winds, beyond names, beyond language. So Emmy, you opened up a whole beautiful understanding with your question. I really appreciate it. Who else wants to jump in? Thank you, Terry, for your comments.
Michael,
Yep.
in listening to this conversation, I am wondering if when we make something sacred, there can be good in that, but there can also be danger in that we now make it only approachable and make it harder for us to actually experience it. And I'm having this thought, I don't know where to take it, but we use our language and then we make something sacred and we make it smaller than it actually is. And then we try to approach it rather than be in the moment and experience it. And so I was just having that thought and I wanted to throw that out there.
Well, you said a whole mouthful, Steve, and if you don't mind me responding just briefly, I love what you said about we make something sacred. You know, Emil Durkheim, the father of modern sociology, makes this point very clearly, right? That things that are sacred are not sacred in and of themselves. We make them sacred. And by the way, Freud, in his wonderful work on taboo, talks about this, and that is that what happens then, we surround the things that we make sacred with taboos. Taboo and sacred go hand in hand. Durkheim and Freud both make this point very clearly. We surround them with taboos, which does what? It elevates them to some supreme unquestioned level. We elevate them so that it becomes approachable, but they also become unapproachable, right? Become unquestioned. The fancy word Christians have used is transcendent. So that's right, Steve. That's right. Exactly.
Well, I go back to the very first question that was asked in this conversation about vaccines. And a lot of what we do is based on what we hold sacred. And so rather than what Jesus said, your attention should go towards the poor and the vulnerable. And so we have this vaccination program, which is very difficult for the vulnerable and the poor to access. But us of means, it's very easy. And so I think, I'm not trying to judge what's going on, but I'm just thinking, to me, that has a very clear impact on how we handle the vaccination program. And this whole discussion has kind of gone full circle to that in my mind.
You know, we need these objects that we elevate to be sacred. We need them as signposts along the way because we're human beings. But you remember, right, the old Buddhist saying, when the wise man points to the moon, all the fool sees is the finger. We need the finger, but the finger is only the finger, right? It's not the moon. And we need the finger, but we can't confuse the finger for the moon. Who else wants to jump in? Thank you, Steve, very much for that. Matt, please.
There's like these questions are just have my mind is going everywhere. Kind of related to Steve's question, but you started it with your sitting at the foot of a Zen teacher, and I think it was last week you made a difference of Zen and Tibetan Buddhist traditions get to by very, very different, but they both hold key the three gems, and a crucial part of that. On the one hand, we're doing this as almost a classroom lecture or a history, but I want to ask, and this ties into Pat's life experience and meditation. I want to ask a little bit personal on you, Michael, is what, not just learning about Zen, but participating by yourself, but participating with a community of others, because as you mentioned, psychologists have understand, now neurobiologists are seeing different pathways of the brain get enlarged for people who meditate for years. And so there's not just emotional or spiritual changes, but there's actually now documented physical changes that happen within the brains on what pathways we function. So I guess I just would invite you to share a little bit more on the experiential aspect of your brief time with Zen approach to life.
Well, you're a stinker, Matt. I would just let me say it. Let me say it this way. It not only remember, this was 2 years after my 2 years with Swami Chetanananda, the Vedanta master. But I saw my work with Zen as an extension because, of course, working with Swami really exploded my understanding of symbol and metaphor and story and image and the vastness of the various ways we picture reality, the various ways we picture God. So you remember in the Hinduism class, I mean, you know, and even when we talk about yoga and the chakras. But Buddhism took me to that necessary step of nothingness and emptiness. That was really, and it made me a better counselor. Actually, it made me a better pastoral counselor because, of course, made me a better friend, actually, because you see more deeply into the questions that are really being asked. You know, when my friends talk, or when my friends give opinions, or when I hear opinions in political discourse, even, I don't really believe the words. I try to, the words be the wordlessness beyond the words, the feel, the emotional place within a person from where the words are coming, their fears, their dreams, their hopes, their tears. So it made me more, and in fact, it made me more politically active. If really one wants to incarnate one's Buddha nature, it has to be political, right? Because you're enlarging this circle of care. I could go on and on, but I think I'll leave it at that for now, Matt. But it made me more political, and it made me reinterpret my Christian faith in radically new ways. Terry suggested a couple when he talked about the kingdom of God is the Buddhaverse. Who else? We have a couple more minutes. Thanks for
This is Jan. I'm sorry. I guess I always bring it down to my own simple experience, personal experience, and I really have trouble envisioning heaven. It seems like such a far out idea, you know. I want to be happy in heaven. I want heaven now. And I think I sometimes struggle with that, and thinking I'm going to see people later and all this and that. But I think, you know, in my own recovery as an alcoholic, you know, needing that higher power initially, because we're not doing too good a job by ourselves. And then as you grow and begin to know yourself better, you feel more like you're taking layers off and becoming the true nature, the person that you're meant to be. And that ends in all kinds of, you know, justice, social work with people. Then other people start to matter more. But it's from a position of total selfishness to opening up your world to other people. And so I can relate so many ways to all of this. It's in a very simple, basic level, you know.
Well, Jan, you said something really profound there, and let me just pick up on that. Heaven, and I should have said this earlier, but I'm glad that you really are helping us to hone in on this. Heaven is not a place or state of being; it's a process. Heaven is the journey; it's not the end of the journey.
Right.
And so, I mean, if we want to call it heaven, I mean that's our Western Christian understanding, but it's knowing you, Jan, the way I do, you create pieces of heaven as you move around the world in the way you touch people's lives, and so. These kind of pods of positive energy that you kind of exude, you know, the positive energy fields that you, and by the way, I'm looking around the screen here that all of you,
Everybody.
all of us exude, right? These positive energy fields that we just that emit from us as we move around our daily lives. Well, you're spreading a little bit of heaven wherever you go. Heaven's the process. It's the journey. It's not the end. You know, it's not the goal. And so, Jan, thank you for being you, and thanks for that.
Oh, thanks, Mike.
Any last minute thoughts, gang? I'm aware of the time. I'm ready to play that the Three Jewels as it's being chanted to and with the Dalai Lama. But if anybody wants to say any final comments, I'm happy to let you do that.
Michael, my only question would be, how soon can we re-listen to this as a recording, and what method do we use to get to it?
Well, that's very kind of you, Linda. I have remembered to hit the record button this morning. So Tina will have it on Tuesday morning. She will send it to me. I will send it to John Dietraz, my good buddy in Columbus, Ohio, who some of you know. and then he will make a YouTube out of it. And if I will remember now that you've asked, Linda. I will send it out to all of you. It'll be Wednesday or Thursday probably. Is that all right? But it'll be as a YouTube. You know, this was a rich conversation this morning. Thank you all for just joining me on this journey. You know, these classes are a way of the way that we as a sangha, right? They're greater than the sum of our parts. And I appreciate the spirit in which we're spending time together on Sunday mornings. Next week, that was Zen. This is Tao. We'll talk about Zen, and I'm gonna try to distill my 3 or 4 75-minute lectures on Zen into about 25 minutes. But it'll be a little history, it'll be a little koan, a little haiku, and some other fun stuff next week. And so I hope you'll join us. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to share the screen. It's about 4 minutes and 20 seconds or so. And then I'm going to say goodbye. So hang on if you'd like, and we'll go from there. But thanks, everybody, and we'll see you then next Sunday. So let me share the screen here, and we'll go from there.
계산기 주지들 금방 벽이도 가르쳐 봤네. 렉자를 하이께도 겸주 뇌한단체 소양 비두 조슈.
Satatam Namah
Thanks, everyone. We will see you next time.